northern Australia, and a moment to savour. Within minutes, this place can turn into hell on earth. The temperature will start rising into the high 90s, and swarms of biting insects will take to the air.
This tropical woodland absolutely teems with wildlife, and it's that very abundance of life that makes travelling here such a challenge. In fact, this environment has the very real potential to turn a journey into a nightmare.
Of all the places in the world I've been, and that's every kind of natural environment on the planet, this wilderness, called Arnhemland, is one of the most inhospitable there is. This is the country of man-eating crocodiles, deadly spiders, and 9 out of 10 of the world's most venomous snakes. But the #1 terror here is mosquitoes. Their potent bite is simply intolerable.
The last sound recordist who came to Arnhemland with me was conveniently on holiday when this trip came up. I think it's probably got something to do with waking up each morning with his eyes so swollen he couldn't see out of them.
The reason I've come back is to retrace a journey that ranks as one of the all-time feats of endurance and survival. Arnhemland is wild country isolated at the top of Australia's Northern Territory. It's pristine wilderness covering an area the size of Ireland. This land is a mosaic of open woodland, grassy plains, mangroves and swamps. For more than 20,000 years, this remote tropical region has been home to Aboriginal hunters. Over the years, on several visits, I've been lucky enough to live with the Aborigines and learn from them how to survive in this harsh land, where food is scarce and water hard to find. Tourists aren't allowed to enter this land, probably just as well. This isn't the terrain for the faint-hearted. It's incredibly easy to get lost in this flat, featureless woodland, and if you did get into trouble, you'd be lucky to survive more than a few days. If you can find fresh water here, it's best to take full advantage. This billabong is the only drinking water for hundreds of square miles, which is why I'm going to build my camp here. Like all things Aboriginal, my shelter will be simple but very effective. What's more, it takes only about an hour to build. To cover my shelter, all I need is to peel layers of bark from the paper bark tree. Done correctly, the tree is unharmed. You need a shelter here to provide shade from the baking sun, as well as protection from the frequent tropical downpours.
This paper bark is absolutely brilliant stuff for shelter building. Of course, it's got thousands of other uses as well. But just a few sheets of that, the shelter will be completely covered. The next thing to think about, though, is fire. If you found yourself lost out here, you might think that these burned out areas had nothing to offer, but you'd be wrong. They're full of useful things. Take this for example. This is the red-flowered kurrajong. Now this is a young plant growing and it's got lots of uses. I could take the bark off of this to make string, or I could dig up the root and get food and a big drink of water. This is the same plant that got burned last year, and down at the base of this you find these nice dry sticks which are perfect for friction firelighting.
I love the elegant simplicity of this method of firelighting, but everything's more difficult in Arnhemland, and the high humidity means I've really got to work at it.
probably the best form of carbohydrate for a survivor in this environment is going to be this plant here, the pandanus, because it's very easy to learn to recognise it. The bit we need is at the base of these central leaves, but they're covered in spines, so you've got to be really careful, otherwise we're going to end up with a handful of thorns. The last thing you need in a survival situation. And that's the bit there, that white bit at the base. It's a bit like the heart of a palm tree. It's delicious. One of the advantages of camping right by a billabong is there's loads of food. Not only have I got lots of plants, but here in the dead leaves on the pond edge I'm finding these freshwater mussels, and that's the sort of protein you want in a survival situation, one you just pick up with your hands. But I've also seen lots of wallaby tracks here, and if I was here long enough I could make some sort of weapon and hunt them if I had to.
When dusk falls, plagues of mosquitoes come out in a feeding frenzy. Their bite is exquisitely painful. By far the most effective mosquito repellent, and still widely used by Aborigines, is the smudge fire. You make this by collecting pieces from the inside of this type of termite mound. The smoke given off from the fire when this stuff burns is an extremely effective deterrent.
Arnhemland is vast. Countless people have died here from exposure and starvation. But it's also the setting for one of the most remarkable stories of survival.
During the Second World War, the Royal Australian Air Force flew regular sorties over Arnhemland. They were defending the Northern Territories against the constant threat of Japanese invasion. In May 1942, 3 airmen were on a mission to rescue an injured soldier. They had lost their bearings and were rapidly running out of fuel. The pilot had no option other than to make an emergency landing.
In an instant, the 3 airmen found themselves catapulted back to the Stone Age. And that's exactly what this series is about. What happens when you find yourself in a situation where you have to rely solely upon your own resources with none of today's mod cons? Sometimes in those situations, ordinary people do extraordinary things.
These pictures are a remarkable record of the crash and do little to foretell the horrors to come. They were taken in high spirits as the men were confident they'd be rescued. George Booth was the wireless operator, Frank Smallhorn was the pilot, and Phil Bronk, the only one still alive today, was a medical officer with the Australian Air Force.
We were quite exhilarated really that we'd survived a crash. We weren't worried, we had full confidence in the Air Force picking us up. We didn't make too much in the way of preparations because regulations stated at that time you had to stay with the aircraft for 7 days.